What's going on, guys? Even though I've already technically done two different reviews on Ghostbusters Afterlife, I brought up some stuff in both reviews that seemingly the internet can't agree on. And that is regarding the now non-canon status of both the Ghostbusters video game for the Xbox and the, well, sequel movie of Ghostbusters 2. So I said in Afterlife, they kind of ignore and or wipe out Ghostbusters 2 from the current canon, and a lot of people have stated a lot of different things about how they didn't, and even Jason Reitman has said, no, Ghostbusters 2 is still a thing, we still reference it. And I'm going to talk about at least all the evidence that I've managed to accumulate. I did download a really crappy torrent version, HD cam, terrible thing, just to look up the stuff that I needed to reference directly from Afterlife, and then going back through references specifically to the Ecto-1, specifically to what Ray says, to even real-world events that took place that are referenced by the movie itself that may indicate when certain things happened, how certain things have gone, and then, of course, talking about just details therein. I heard, at least in one review, how Phoebe was clearly meant to be autistic. I didn't get those vibes, but if that's what they were intending, fine. I just took her to be much like Egon, which, if anything, I would assume that Egon had some form of Asperger's, maybe, because he's kind of a loner, super, focused and logical, stuff like that, but I didn't take Phoebe to be on the spectrum, but that's just me. But if you're a person who is on the spectrum and you feel that way, fine. I mean, unless told otherwise, I guess there's no reason to go against those feelings. I mean, I'm not saying that that's a no. I'm just saying I didn't pick up on that. I just thought she was a really intelligent, weird little girl because she's just like her grandpa. It was probably exactly the same. Now, like I said, was he maybe a little bit on the Asperger's and stuff like that? Probably, but he's also just hyper intelligent. She's hyper intelligent. Hell, she's repairing technology that she's almost never seen before. Knows exactly what parts are missing and how to fix it just by looking at it. And maybe there's a little bit of influence just from him being there and stuff like that, but that's all speculation. But like I said, if you felt that way, talking to Mint Salad, if you're on the spectrum, fine, no problem with that, obviously. If you felt that way because she seemed to represent a lot of the same things that you experience and feel, that's fine. I got no problem with that. I just that was not a take that I had heard from anyone else, so that was a very interesting thing in there. I'm not discounting it. I just did not experience that, and unless told otherwise, no reason to not believe it or argue. So, just wanted to say that. So, let's start out with a pretty obvious one that really eliminates the video game from canon. The fact that Ivo Shandor is in Afterlife eliminates the game from canon, because the game follows the fact that you're basically chasing the ghost of Ivo Shandor throughout the whole game as he repossesses the mayor and then other people like that, and is attempting to summon Gozer again, which I believe they manage to summon Gozer. You fight the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man again, seal off Gozer, and then Shandor decides to use the mandalas and stuff like that he has set up in New York to basically channel all that energy and turning himself into a god from his ghostly form in the alternate realm. He even becomes a destructor and all that kind of stuff like that, and you end up having to fight him in that other realm. So he can't be quote-unquote alive in this new movie. Now, technically he did die. And according to this movie, he died in 1945. In previous canon, it stated that he died in 1955, or I'm sorry, 35. So there's that. But apparently he was born in most canons in 1855. So that's still kind of there. So Shandor is what it is. Now, it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense why he would go through building the entire temple and everything like that in the building in New York to summon Gozer. and then return to what I mistakenly thought was a new temple they built in Oklahoma. That's actually, that the one from Afterlife is an old Sumerian temple that they built there. He discovered, turned into a mine the selenium. So the Hell Gate, the Hell Mouth, all those things like that are there, they're ancient. So that's actually an old one. Why he decided to build a whole new dealie in New York? Not really relevant. It's really kind of funny. And so if he died in 45, that means he died before the event, in, well, whatever, all of the things that happened in 1945 that the cult of Gozer were predicting, that they were kind of counting down towards. Like we see all the dates. We got 1883, 1908, 1945, 1984 when Gozer gets summoned, and then 2020/2021 because we had to flub that due to COVID. So, assuming those weren't just mile markers, those were a chance to summon Gozer back. Presumably someone would have been making an attempt at any of those points to do this. Now, he took it upon himself to kind of make it happen in 1984, I guess, but with the fact that he already had the building built, as far as we know, and stuff like that, and then if he died in 1945, he probably would have missed his chance then. And then in one version of canon, he died after trying to graft some other type of leg onto himself. I guess probably a spirit or ghost or demon-y leg, because he was into all this kind of crazy stuff, including random surgeries on people, unnecessary surgeries, as Egon put it, I believe. So Shandor really kind of screws that kind of stuff up. So he can't be in this movie if he died in the game. And I believe they actually came out and said that the game can't be canon anyways, even though everybody really did see that as a proper Ghostbusters 3 sequel. It continued the storyline on from 2 and all of that. So the game, out of canon. Still a fun game. Great story. I suggest watching the whole, however long the movie version of the cutscenes takes. I definitely suggest going to watch that. So this was just a tiny little thing that I got from one person who didn't seem to understand the whole Ecto or the Proton Pack deal like that. So in the scene where Egon has led Phoebe to his lab, basically shows her shows her the Proton Pack. She takes it apart, and then he helps her fix it by, giving her a little guided pointing the lights and things. She says that 2 of the CRT emitters are missing.
2 of the CRT emitters are missing. Thanks.
Which would be whatever those parts are. I have no idea. But that's why that Proton Pack was not working. Now, see, that adds a little bit of flubbery to what Proton Pack he used to capture either Vinz or Gozer, whichever terror dog he had at the beginning of the movie. Whichever one he caught that with, we don't know. That's one kind of... But I did say that it's entirely possible he used one of the ones that he had installed at the mine to capture that, and then came back, because clearly he couldn't have put the Proton Pack in his lab after he's dead. He wasn't really good at moving stuff, but then he also would have been able to repair it. So for whatever reason, that one was damaged. He had those CRT emitters missing. She puts them in there and then goes after with some needle nose pliers, fixing other stuff down below the cyclotron. So he did show her how to repair the Proton Pack, so it was out of service for whatever reason. Now, there was still the one in the Ecto-1, which is a whole separate unit. We've talked about that before. And then, of course, the 4 that were in the thing. Now, let's talk about the phone call with Ray that Phoebe makes.
Oh, well, look, when we started, busting ghosts was a gas. The economy was good, Reagan years. People believed in us. And things got slow, hauntings got thin. Venkman thought we did our job too well. Oh, we could barely keep up our mortgage. Some actor bought up most of Tribeca and we lost the firehouse. It's a Starbucks now.
which is kind of a big giveaway towards how the events of Ghostbusters 2, outside of maybe the very beginning area, is that. So for those who don't remember, Ghostbusters takes place in 1984, Ghostbusters 2 takes place 5 years later in 1989. And in between, basically, everything goes to shit. So, if you watch the beginning of Ghostbusters 1, I'll hopefully play a clip here, and then Sony will get all freaked out about it.
It's our best season.
Ray, man, face it, Ghostbusters doesn't exist. A year from now, those kids won't even remember who we are.
Ungrateful little yuppie larva. After all we did for this city.
Yeah. We conjured up a 100-foot marshmallow man, threw the top 3 floors off an uptown high-rise, ended up getting sued by every state, county, and city agency in New York.
Yeah, but what a ride.
But basically, after blowing up the top of the building, defeating Gozer, and causing all that damage, they were sued by every state, county, and city agency of New York, basically taking all their money, basically taking away any license they had to do any ghost busting, and with the fact that essentially ghost busting in and of itself dries up. So let's leave that as obvious canon. Ray, after Phoebe calls her, gives the entire story that basically, after however much time, ghost busting went from 10 calls a week to 1 call a week. They had no money. They already talked about how expensive the firehouse was in the first place. Basically, with no income coming in, ghost work drying up, massive lawsuits against them, it would have been very difficult to stay in business, so they all started to kind of go their separate ways, except for Egon, who insisted something was coming.
We went from 10 calls a week to 1 if we were lucky. And then Egon started to tell people that their little ghost problems didn't matter because the world was coming to an end. He got spooky, freaked me out. One morning I go to work, an Ecto-1, our old Cadillac, is gone, his neutrino thrower, collider pack, all the traps, 16 ounces of fuel isotope, all gone. He cleaned us out.
So he looked into the cult of Gozer, was digging more and more into the books, as he pretty much references, and states that, you know, he figured out something, there's something spooked him, and started acting crazy. And when nobody would believe him, he takes, specifically, takes his neutrino one, his collider pack, so he's talking about the proton pack, the neutrino one, they treat them as separate objects. Our old Cadillac, the Ecto-1, that's what he says, 16 ounces of fuel isotope, however much that might be in relation to how much they need, because we know that the proton packs have enough power and juice to run for about 5,000 years in of themselves without damage. And then that was one tiny argument that somebody made. It was like when I said it's like, no, his proton pack was broken, this person replied, no, they can run for 5,000 years. I said broken, not ran out of power. Same thing with anybody wondering how the original Ghostbusters proton packs were still working. In theory, if nothing went wrong with them, because Egon invented them, assuming nothing went wrong with them over all the decades they were just sitting unused in storage, they would just flip them on and hopefully everything worked for the best. Obviously, we know Egon had been playing with his over the years, upgrading it, doing all kinds of other stuff. If you take any concept of Ghostbusters or Extreme Ghostbusters and into it, to where over the years Ghosts got a little stronger, had to play with it, change the output, things like that. But in this case, Ghosts were essentially dried up, not a whole lot going on. Now the gigantic spiritual conduits and magnets drawing in any extra spiritual energy. So, oh, and then the other thing is he took all the traps. We covered this before. So everybody wondering, how did the Ghostbusters have their packs? If Egon took everything, he specifically says he took his neutrino wand and collider pack. That's what he says. So he didn't say he took all of them. He just said he took his. So, and he didn't say packs. He said that. So he only took his original, which would be the one that Phoebe fixed. That is his original, as far as we can tell. And he built the rest of them as it went. I mean, building one that sits in the Ecto-1 as a gunner seat, building the other ones that are remote kind of setup, you know, slightly more compact, more than likely, and, you know, with enough fuel to run everything for however much time that he needed to. And then at the end of that, he did say that, or Ray says that Egon called him about 10 years later.
He phoned me about 10 years later, some small town in Oklahoma. Kept rambling on about the rising storm, a huge psychic tornado that was going to consume humanity in darkness forever.
Which, if we are saying that Ghostbusters 2 didn't happen, it's entirely possible that these events, Egon going nuts and all that stuff, may have happened somewhere in like 1988, but mostly 1989, when 2 would have taken place, would make sense. Now, if you just assume that 2 does not exist, nobody believes in ghosts anymore, everyone thinks that the Ghostbusters are full of shit, and they just blew up a whole bunch of stuff, because not everybody saw what happened. But nobody would be able to ignore the Statue of Liberty walking through the streets, heading to what I think is it the Metropolitan Museum or whatever, to blow the roof of it off, or smash the roof of it off on New Year's Eve. Nobody would miss that. That's the other thing. The dates on the Shandor mine, 1989 and 1991, were not included, meaning those were 2 massive apocalyptic things that they couldn't predict. To tell me one giant evil cult couldn't predict another one's giant evil creature, deity, person would also be coming back to make an apocalypse happen? Because we find out all the stuff from Vigo later on. So the fact that this movie doesn't reference anything at all from 1989, that's a problem. Oh, but Ray's Occult Books, because that was in the second movie. Why was Ray's Occult Book in the second movie? Because Ghostbusters had shut down and he made that happen. He covers that in this. They shut down. The firehouse was bought out. In fact, here's some real world fun trivia for you guys. So, in 1989, the actor, Robert De Niro, started buying up money, or buying up stuff in Tribeca, where they're located, to kind of set up a filming area in New York, and that's where a lot of those movies in the early 90s and stuff like that were shot, in that area of New York, because he bought all that stuff up. In this, Ray specifically says some actors started buying up all of Tribeca, and we had to sell the firehouse. It's a Starbucks now. That was bullshit. It was not turned into a Starbucks, obviously. And if you actually look at Google Maps, pretty much the first thing, the Tribeca Grill, if I remember correctly, if I looked it up, the Tribeca Grill is essentially right down the street from the firehouse. And then even another thing, a hotel that Mr. De Niro purchased and set up, also within the same blockage of New York. So real world events, actor buying up areas in Tribeca to develop and turn into new things, and that was also kind of a renaissance for that area. It makes sense that basically they can't afford to stay there anymore. A lot of artists that were in the area at the time also kind of had to move out. Like, it was kind of a budding artistry area. And then once they started gentrifying it, making it nicer, making it more high-end, the poor people basically all moved out. And they sold out to much higher corporations and things like that. And yes, where the Tribeca Film Festival comes from. Duh. This would mean that all of those events would have to happen probably around 1989 to 1990. But 1989 is when the Vigo event happened. If all that happened and the Ghostbusters not only were given a fuck ton of money to start back up and all that kind of stuff, then that would all be referenced. When they look at the YouTube clips and they're talking about these guys literally, Gary says they blew the roof off of a high rise. That is almost a straight line from Ghostbusters 2 at the beginning, where they're talking about what happened. You know, we blew the roof off a high rise and we got sued by every state, county, and city agency around. Basically, 1989, 1990. By this point, they're defunct. They've got no money. They're barely busting ghosts, if at all. Egon is the only one remotely interested in what's going on. He digs deeper into the cult of Gozer, sorry, and starts freaking out because no one else is listening to him. He discovers probably these ancient Sumerian maps that we know that he has in this movie that shows this town, Somerville or whatever it is, and He finds the mine, he finds the temple, finds the Hellmouth, and now knows that there's a big gap between 1984, where the previous thing that they stopped happened, and 2020, technically originally. So he's basically just waiting out the next 30 years, attempting to stop it from happening, and he's kind of alone. And then even 10 years later, when he calls for help with Ray, saying, look, this is what I found, this is what's going on, help. And then they said no. So basically saying the events of movie 2 didn't happen. And yes, I know that Jason Reitman has said, we referenced the second movie. There's like Ray's Occult Books, there's the Twinkies, and there's the toaster. And the toaster is just kind of a Easter egg, more or less. There's like one other small like Easter egg. I was watching the behind the scenes stuff with Adam Savage and Tested to find out it was the same toaster they used to do the slime test. And two, one, why would you ever use that again for real toast making purposes? But the fact that it is actually the original prop, which is really cool in and of its own self. That's just a fun little cameo. Doesn't mean anything when it comes to the canon of this movie. Sorry, that's just the way it is. These are just straight facts and opinions, let's be honest here. The other major thing, the Ecto-1. And I know this has been covered by I don't know how many more people. This is just me doing it. So, for those who don't know, I am currently building an Ecto-1 from Eagle Moss 1/8 scale Ecto-1, which is ridiculous. And it is set up for original movie because that's the one that exists. So, there was a lot of confusion when the Afterlife trailer first dropped. Even I made a thing about it. I talked about it on a live stream. I made posts about it. And everybody else did in the world too. And there was a tiny bit of confusion. So everybody thought, correctly, that the original Ecto-1 was back. But then it meant, what happened to the Ecto-1A? Which I think I was incorrectly calling the Ecto-1B in a previous video. And then through Hemming, Motor News, and other things like that, it was actually discovered that this Ecto-1 was actually made from the Ecto-2 from the second movie. And they mean that in the literal sense. The actual vehicle that they built, that was the Ecto-1A, was stripped down and turned into this version of the regular Ecto-1. And I mean that in the literal production of the movie sense, not within movie canon. So here's the thing. This goes even back to the novelization of original Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2. Where if you read the novels, they usually will throw in little details from the original script because they're usually written off the original script and screenplay and then modified, but without any of the movie editing that would cut out deleted scenes and stuff like that. So, at one point, somewhere, and I couldn't find the exact source for this, it said that the original Ecto-1, the one we know and love, ended up, getting into disrepair like we see it at the beginning of Ghostbusters 2. In 1989, just falling apart, just running like crap. They've got no money, and then it just ends up dying. I think on the Brooklyn Bridge. The car just craps out, and they just said screw it. That's a perfectly plausible explanation. Now, the important key inference here is that once they get money, once the ghosts are now going nuts again, once they have the backing from the city after what happened when they were taken to court, they now have a lot of money. And in the book, it specifically shows this. Pretty much stating that the Ecto-1A that we see is a brand new purchase and refurbished ambulance, or hearse. I think it says ambulance specifically, right? And they added all these new equipment. Now, if you look at the wiki, you look at other things, there's conflicting evidence because they draw from slightly different sources, where one will say that the Ecto-1A is an upgraded form of the original Ecto-1, which was everyone's belief forever until we got the novelization, which clearly states it is actually a brand new car. And if you go with the concept that the old one kicked the bucket, and it would just be easier to go ahead and start over new once you've got money, especially considering at that point they got no money, you just scrap the damn thing, and they're in between. Now, here's a major thing. So there are really big differences between the Ecto-1 and the Ecto-1A. One, the obvious changes to the roof rack. That's the lights. There's like multiple stacks of lights. There's just the big bubble tank thing near the back. There's the all-new LED screens. You know what I mean? The dot matrix type screens going down the side. The other thing is you have the bar stickers going down each side as well. Their phone number, their call us symbol, and then of course the Ghostbusters 2 logo on the side. There's also a new light on the grill, a bunch of other things that are different. Now, none of those things are present at all in the Afterlife Ecto-1. None of them. You can actually look the Ecto-1 in Afterlife externally, with the exception of the ladder that has been moved from the passenger side to the driver's side, which is explained by the gunner seat, because otherwise the gunner seat couldn't flip open. It is the exact same. There's no hood. There's no hood logo. The big 2 rows of vents that are near the front of the hood are present on this one, and they are not on the A. Once again, the door logos and the back logo are all the original logo. Not to mention it's the original license plate, which is different. And all of the rooftop equipment is exactly the same from the beginning. Now, 1 or 2 items did transfer from the 1 to the 1A, but not much. Just a couple things here and there. There's also another giveaway at the back. The original Ecto-1 has a standard bumper. The Ecto-1A has a very thick, chunky red bumper, which I think is meant to be like a ramp situation, or it's just a different setup. But either way, that's a wholly different piece of the car. And the funny thing is that if you really look into it, you see a deleted scene, you see a whole bunch of other stuff, even an reference to one spoken line. Originally, the car was going to be called Ecto-2, not the Ecto-1A, really talking about the fact that there were 2 cars. The original one died, or was put in storage, or sold for scrap, and then the 2 comes along as the upgrade. However, at the same time, the real Ghostbusters series was playing, and there was an Ecto-2, which was the helicopter plane thingy that they would fly to fight bigger monsters. So, to avoid confusion for the kids that they needed to sell more toys to, we get rid of the Ecto-2, we call it the Ecto-1A, which is basically how you get naming conventions for Star Trek ships. You just start throwing letters at the end of it. And then even in the game canon, and I think even within the IDW Comics canon, the Ecto-1B sort of comes in as well as an upgrade to the A. That adds like the Mega Muon Slammer, something like that, because you use that in the game. That's like a giant thing where they can like grab ghosts and slam them in. It's like a giant trap that's on the roof. Works on large things, works on large groups of things. So that's an upgrade that they got in the game, and then also in the comics. The comics kind of combines all the universes, and I really want to read the IDW comics because a lot of cool stuff happens, including with Gozer's sister. And apparently in the comics canon, Gozer isn't non-binary. Gozer is a male entity, and his sister, Tiamat, is a female entity who causes a lot of hell for the Ghostbusters in the comic books from what I saw. Including, I believe, also the destruction of the Ecto-1 at one point where it gets squished by a giant entity. So, this Ecto-1 is the original car. The original one from the movie, not in real universe, not our timeline, in their timeline, that Egon stole. Now, in that version, if all of that happened, it would have been before they purchased the Ecto-1A car and rebuilt everything, because they never had the next events that kicked off. So if we assume, like, and this is the thing, this also could be slightly alternate universe. The comic books acknowledge there is a Ghostbusters multiverse. I've talked about this. And they have Ghostbusters of the same name, different names. There's even a Chicago division Ghostbusters in the comics. All that kind of stuff. So even the stupid 2016 movie could be technically a different universe. And honestly, we could have a crossover at some point, and that would be amazing. I would be down for that, especially after Gozer being beaten, stripped down of its power, and stuff like that. And if they really wanted to continue this on, and they want to bring in Kylie and Ricardo, who, you know, from Extreme Ghostbusters, who also come in to work with Dan at Dan's Occult Books. Not Dan, Ray's Occult Books. They still have the setup for that, and that would be super awesome. But like I said, the fact that this Ecto-1 is entirely modeled on the original version that was run down and all that stuff. And like I said, if it happened in 1989 when he left, or 1990 at best, he would have taken all the crap and left. And basically left them with a firehouse, the containment unit, which is still in the basement of a building that's not being maintained. Scary. And then the fact that Winston, if the Ecto-1A still existed and remained in New York, like a lot of people thought, Winston would probably not care about the fact of returning the Ecto-1 back to New York, like he says at the end of the movie, and you see him literally take it back to the firehouse and all that kind of stuff like that. So yeah, there's so many arguments saying that that it's still canon. This movie really does just not acknowledge 2. And I've spoken to a lot of people who agree with that even before I brought it up. I said, "Hey, what do you think about how this movie plays out?" And I said, "Well, I don't think it kind of gets rid of gets rid of Ghostbusters 2." And without me saying it. So there's other people who definitely have that thought, way bigger movie critics and reviewers to me, stuff like that. And then people have asked Jason Reitman about it, and he's like, no. I think he just wants to keep that door open in case they ever want to play with anything. But like, the slime tunnels could still be there. We just eliminate the idea that Vigo was a thing. And that's fine. That was one of the dumber aspects of that movie. It would also explain why Peter and Dana might still have a relationship, even though they picked it back up. But assuming that they never broke up, and she never got married, never had the kid, any of that stuff. But even if that did happen, because we kind of ignore all those old characters, we come back to New York and Dana's kid becomes like a new leader of the Ghostbusters, that's going to be great. So that's pretty much my arguments as to how Afterlife eliminates Ghostbusters 2 and the video game from canon. It just doesn't make sense. Like, you can have the references, but they still make sense within the universe that we're given. So, like I said, if you eliminate the things that kick off the movie with the slime and Dana's baby nearly being kidnapped, the Ghostbusters never get involved. Ghosts don't start returning. They never get backing from the city again. They never start going on endless calls. Because you got to think, number 2 takes place between right before Christmas and New Year's. So, I mean, a couple weeks at best. And they start going crazy. Like, I mean, that's the truth of it. Like, in a couple weeks, they get a ton of funding, have a new car, better equipment, all these things. Also, seemingly the gray suits don't exist in Afterlife. Now, I know they switch back and forth between the original tan and then the gray suits throughout 2, the different adventures in 2, but seemingly the gray suits don't exist there, which they only picked up in 2. So I don't know. And then I'm going to address this. There's a lot of people who are very mad about the way Egon's character was handled. The way he kind of went nuts, turned on his friends, abandoned his family. And by the way, this movie makes no attempt to explain where Egon's family came from, who his wife is, or any of that kind of stuff. Because he would have had to have gotten married and had Callie by 1989. So in the 5 years of all the other stuff going on, he would have had to have gotten married and had a kid. And he left her young, where she remembered him enough, but acknowledged the fact that he left. And it would have had to have been in New York. Now I need to go back and rewatch again and double check, make sure she moved from New York to Oklahoma for that situation, but I believe that is what happened. So, in theory, he was married, had a kid, at least one kid, I don't know if he had any others, and left on this crusade to go save the world that nobody believed in. Apparently not even his own family, at least enough for him to bring them along. And if you look at Egon's character, he's very logical, he's very Vulcan about a lot of things. He's very curious about human experience, You know, especially in the second movie where he's playing with emotions. The first movie when they're looking at the brain, they're looking at all these other things. And he's definitely more into fungus and things like mold spores and stuff like that. He's a weirdo. And he's, while not devoid of character, thinks of things very, very logically and scientifically. So if he managed to get into a relationship, it would have to be with somebody who could at least deal with that. And yes, there is the hints of him and Janine. We talked about that in the regular reviews. There's no true evidence that they ever got together or anything like that. Just maybe they had a small thing in '84 when they first met. And then the whole coin thingy, which I got wrong. Apparently there were 2 coins. She had one, he had one. That kind of stuff. So a lot of people are mad about what they did with his character, and they're claiming that it shits on Harold Ramis's legacy as a Ghostbuster. And I don't think those people realized that Jason and Ivan brought in his family, you know, his daughter and everybody else that's still around, to make sure this was fine, to make sure this was okay. And a lot of people get mad because I guess he really did work on the game a bit, you know, if he helped write it and stuff like that. And kind of all the guys were more or less involved in the making of the movie, but it was all really Dan Aykroyd, where everything came from, and then it was tweaked by however many different script rewrites and stuff like that. And I'm sure that Harold Ramis was involved somewhere in there. This doesn't destroy the legacy of Harold Ramis in any way, shape, or form, but it does pay homage to the character, and you know, in the fact that he did die, they keep his character alive, so to speak, through the movie. You know, even though everyone thought he was an asshole who abandoned everybody, he just took on the hero's role and threw his own life on the fire to protect the world. And it's just that nobody would believe him. And so everybody getting mad at him for being made out to be the asshole is not what it comes down to. It comes down to everyone else being an asshole and not sticking by their friend, their colleague, their fellow scientist, and everybody having to take care of their own shit. And the movie was even the use of his likeness and stuff like that to make Egon, and I said that they took what he looked like in modern day, and it's close. It looks like they basically just aged up the last appearance of Egon and a little bit of influence there. They didn't do anything to hurt, you know, the actor's legacy. They didn't. And I'm sorry if you feel that way, but you're kind of a jerk when it comes to that, because his own family said, this is good, go forward with our blessing, because they weren't going to do it without him. They're not going to do it without the blessing of his family, and then just shit all over the character that he helped create and that he embodied. It's like, if they ran it through the family and the family said no, you think they would have just gone through it? Considering Ivan Reitman himself was on board with this even from the beginning. You know, it may have been Jason's idea, but there's a reason his dad was still involved every step of the way. And then once they got all the old actors involved, of course, everybody was really concerned and, of course, sad that Harold is gone. And they all believe it is a fitting tribute. So if everyone involved believes it's a fitting tribute, your fucking opinion as a fan doesn't matter. That just means you're an asshole. I'm sorry. It's like, even if I like you as a reviewer and stuff like that, there's a lot of people out there that I followed that really, really pissed off a lot of fans because of their negative views and their negative reviews of this movie. And you're welcome to your own feelings and stuff like that. But when they're based off, when it's not based on facts, when it's based on just your feelings, then it hurts. Because even I said it, and so many other people have said it over and over and over. And I saw no reviews of this movie before I reviewed it. And then I hear other people literally saying almost word for word what I said. You know, this is a love letter. And then literally Jason Reitman said, no, this is a love letter to the original movie and the original movies. You know, he can say what he wants. He literally eliminated the movie from canon by his own writing and action. So they did not shit on Harold's legacy in any way, shape, or form. They did not shit on Egon as a character, because the redemption wasn't for Egon. The redemption was for everyone who didn't believe in Egon. They all had to come to his thing. It's like one person in the whole damn movie believed in what Egon was doing, and that was Phoebe. and she was defending him right and left because nobody else bothered. No one else cared. Everybody just saw the one act he did that affected them directly, but never bothered to look into the reasoning behind it. Because even Dan says, like, I'm sorry I didn't believe... I keep saying Dan. Even Ray said, I'm sorry that I didn't believe you, you know. And given Ray and his connection to the occult, and even in the second movie when they're going through Ray's books for references, Ray could have easily looked at the same information that Egon had and came up with it, but if he's literally worried about saving his own ass, because maybe he just bought the bookstore, and he's struggling, he's like, look man, the ghost thing isn't working, okay, you're going nuts with this, I gotta cover my own ass. Winston doing the same thing. Peter started a dumbass talk show, assuming that might have been still canon. You know, he ended up doing other stuff later on, you know, going to work for a company and becomes a marketing guru and all that kind of stuff, which makes sense for Peter to do. But assuming almost everything else happened from 1984 to 1989, but you eliminate anything and everything according that happened with Vigo, Afterlife completely makes sense. The only thing we're lacking is who was Egon with, and where did his family come from? Because if he left in 89 instead of doing all of the experiments with emotion and negative emotions and effect on stuff like that, which led to studying the slime, which led to the positive and negatively charged slime and all that crap that helped them defeat Vigo. Which is cool for canon, because bringing slime into it and all that kind of stuff, especially in the video game, it's a huge deal. And then we figure out where the slime is coming from in the first place with the slore, all that kind of crap. Go watch the movie version of the game, and it's really, really cool, and it does suck that it's not technically canon. But once again, this is a multiverse. There's a universe where number 2 in the game are 100% canon and continued on. There's a movie universe where the 2016 everything happened there and the original never happened at all. You know, and then there's Afterlife, which takes place as the sequel to the original. So if you just cut the original down, it says 5 years later, you get the Ghostbusters are defunct, they're running out of money, and you roll right into Afterlife 30 years later. It makes way more sense. So that's it. That's just my thesis. You know, a lot of people have said it. Not too many people are backing it up. I just wanted to go ahead and throw all this out there. Let me know if it makes sense to you, if it made sense to you from the beginning, but you didn't know this extra information. I mean, the whole thing about Robert De Niro and the fact they actually reference that is pretty cool. Some of the other things talked about with the different dates and stuff like that are based on real life events and stuff like that that are actually referenced within, I think, even in the second movie. But it's fine. Actually, no, I don't think it was in the first movie. Either way, doesn't matter. I'm going to stand by it until they officially rewrite canon again, that Ghostbusters 2 has been eliminated from canon. It's blatantly obvious that the game was removed from canon, I think, even before this. But if you look at certain wikis, it says, because there are multiple wikis for some reason, I mean, it's just you're catching it on different days. Some of it say that the game is still primary canon and it has no Afterlife updates, but the one I did dig through today did include the Afterlife updates, but, you know, only included with the old information and then eliminating it, bumping the game out of canon, turning it to secondary canon, much like the IDW comics. Alright guys, so this went on a little bit longer than I thought it would, but I hope I've explained enough. But that's it. And so, if you haven't watched the original reviews, they're on the channel. The much longer, much longer spoiler review is there, and now having gone back through, I got a few things out of order. Not wrong, just out of order. And then also I want to mention the fact that the girl's name was Lucky. I screwed that up in the actual review. Didn't remember that, didn't notice that. Let me know what you think down below. That's all I'm going to say. Remember, as always, guys, keep on nerding.